Hello everyone, my name is Noah and I have something that I am very excited to share today. Recently I fell in love with this little game called the Bloodline and I've been following and playing it for the past few weeks out of a passion that I don't really get for video games anymore. I have a nostalgic sense of wonder for its development that I haven't felt since a kid, and it's truly a special project. I was lucky enough recently to get the chance to talk to the developer of the game, Milo, and ask him a few questions about his experience with creating the Bloodline, and I also was able to gather some insights on his inspirations as well. While he wasn't able to sit down and talk to me directly for an interview, I did get him to answer some questions over text, and I do have a good friend who is willing to read the answers from his perspective. So just out of common courtesy, I would like to plainly state that while these are his exact answers to what I asked, this is not his voice, and I do hope to get a chance to talk to him fully in the future. But I've already talked about the Bloodline quite a bit in terms of its game mechanics and the basic premise, so I will be retreading a lot of familiar ground in this video. But I hope that I can add a little bit more context behind why certain decisions were made with the game's mechanics, and give everyone a deeper appreciation for the game design as a whole through Milo's experience creating the Bloodline. And for a little bit more background information, since there are going to be people that are not familiar with the project, the Bloodline is an action sandbox RPG developed by Milo under Shieldbearer Studios, and it is his first major foray into game design. The Bloodline takes a lot of inspiration from games and franchises that Milo followed when they were younger, and it's a great testament of showing how pieces of media directly influence each other, and they can lead to new IPs being created out of love for one another. While it is still in active development and there are a lot of features in the game that are either unfinished or untouched, the devs' focus on prioritizing the player's fun and experience is noticeable as hell, as he's constantly trying to work with the community to implement new ideas, and the amount of player choice present in the game is paramount compared to anything else. The game takes the term sandbox and pushes it to its extremes, as the amount of skills, tools, weapons, and items available for the player to use in combination with each other leads to a potentially limitless amount of experiences that players can have in and outside of combat. The experience as a whole is already worth a tiny $20 price tag, but all of the planned additions make it truly seem like it's too good to be true. But after what I've seen with the game itself and talking to Milo about how passionate he is for this project, I genuinely have faith that this is going to become a finished product, and that's not something that you can say for a lot of games anymore, even AAA games especially. And this is an indie game. The amount of times that I've heard of an indie game taking the money that it gets from its players and running off before they can finish the product and deliver on that promise that they originally gave is staggering. And it's happening with AAA developers too. And while I'm talking to Milo, I want everybody that's listening to kind of think about what they've played lately, if it was developed by a bigger studio or a smaller studio, and why they played it. If it was for potentially like the amount of fun that they were having in it, their enjoyment of the individual worlds that they were in, or if they were just, let's say, grinding up their account to get to a certain point. Without further ado though, I want to get into what Milo said to me and talk about his various influences and his history with the game's development. As these questions were asked via text, the wording may seem odd, but I want to read them exactly as I asked them, so bear with me please. Question 1. I wanted to know all general background information that Milo was willing to share. Their name, where they're currently from and located, and how they got into game design, and how long they've been in the industry.
My name is Miles. Most people call me Milo. I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I started game development as a hobby several years ago when I was fresh out of the military. I'm completely self-taught. I've been working in the game industry for about 5 years now.
Question 2. What projects have you worked on before the Bloodline, and how have they helped you develop your skills as a game designer? Are there any big lessons that you learned the hard way? Were there any projects that you had to abandon due to a lack of personal interest or a lack of support?
The Bloodline is my first ever project. Of course, I've had very tiny projects before, but would quickly lose interest in them because they weren't really what I wanted to make. The Bloodline, however, has been really easy to stay focused on because it's a game I've always wanted to make. I have learned so much through the development of the Bloodline. I've made lots of mistakes along the way, but I've learned from all of them, and I feel like I'm finally starting to get a good handle on game development as a whole. The biggest lesson I've learned is definitely to roll with the punches. It sounds silly, but being able to take a hit from work being lost, poor reviews, harsh criticism, stuff like that is very difficult for me. I'm a very anxious person, so handling these things was very difficult at first. I feel that I've come a long way in that regard. Other than that, there's the actual game development itself, which was, and still is, obviously very hard to learn.
Quick side note on this. I think Milo talking about his anxiety in particular is powerful in this instance, since he's completely self-taught and works on the Bloodline by himself. It shows a lot of commitment to the project, and I think it's a great source of inspiration for others who struggle with anxiety and are pushing through their projects as well. His take on rolling with the punches is extremely important as well. Learning not only to push through setbacks and mistakes, but also to just learn from them, is one of the most important processes in accomplishing any goals, big or small. Question 3. With your work on the Bloodline, have you had outside support with any of the elements of the game creation process?
Oh, lots. I'm a horrible 3D modeler and animator, so I outsource almost all of that work. I also outsource the music, as I'm not a talented musician. I do all the writing, coding, and anything else that needs to be done in-engine myself, though.
Question 4. Some inspirations for the game you have worn on your sleeve, such as the Elder Scrolls RPG influence or the overworld map mechanic from Mount & Blade. What other inspirations have you pulled from while designing certain game mechanics or making the world as a whole?
Yup, you're totally right. Morrowind and Mount & Blade are the two biggest influences. I also pulled inspiration from The Dark Messiah, Zelda, Warhammer, World of Warcraft, and RuneScape. These are all games I grew up with and love deeply. I try to pull elements that strike the feeling of nostalgia within me. I find too many games these days just don't invoke that fantastical, fun feeling that I got as a kid.
This too is what makes the game particularly special for me. All of his influences in the creation of this game were ones that I have a particular love for myself. I'm sure that there's even more stuff that influences part of the game, from his world design to storytelling to anything else that he didn't even get to fully dive into. Hopefully I get to sit down and talk to him directly soon, because I really want to dive into the individual elements of what makes this project because of how beautiful it is. The elements that make up a particular game are much like any other form of media or art. It's all based on shared influences that have roots to other shared inspirations. The combination of mechanics from a variety of series that many people grew up with and mixed together to create a world that is truly full of player choice. Question 5. What is the biggest challenge you faced while working on the Bloodline? Is there anything you wish you would have done differently?
Learning engine errors has been tough, and it still is. I'm not an Unreal Engine expert in any regard. When packaging the game, which is essentially compiling it into an executable file, there's a huge array of things that can cause issues and make it not be able to package correctly. I've run into many issues with this step, and it has caused a lot of stress. I've gotten better, of course, but it has been very difficult learning while also trying to be patient and maintain my motivation.
Question 6. Do you have any advice or resources people interested in game design could use to get started on their journey?
I can't say that I recommend that you do what I did, which was dive straight into a massive project. But if you do have the discipline, motivation, and support to do so, then I say you should do it. If you don't, then you should start small and build up from there. Make simple stuff. Push yourself a bit and slowly build up your knowledge. The first step is choosing an engine you want to work with, downloading it, and just trying it out. You'll learn what you like, dislike, what your strengths and weaknesses are. Eventually, you'll find your footing, and you can really start building from there. I used YouTube tutorials to learn many things in Unreal, and I read a ton of the official Unreal documentation as well.
Question 7. How would you define game design? Would you consider it an art form?
Game design is absolutely an art form. It's an art form with the purpose of creating an enjoyable, playable experience. For me, personally, I believe fun should be first and foremost when designing a game. Like I said before, I think games these days don't let the player loose to let them have fun.
Stating that game design is an art form is very appropriate in my eyes. Just like movies or books or poems, they are interactive experiences that let the player create their own stories or art through their experiences. Video games were always seen in a negative connotation while I was growing up, and they still share a lot of that negativity today because of the misunderstanding of what they are. Video games have the potential to connect people, to teach people creative writing styles and world history, or even life lessons through their stories or built community experiences. By experiencing these different worlds and different points of view, there is a lot of positive knowledge that can be gained passively in a more interactive way than a book or a movie could. Milo was an absolute blast to get in touch with and talk to for this project. He's a really down-to-earth person, and every day I see him talking to random community members while he's working on the game and helping them with different things. Like his experience playing Morrowind as a kid, his game takes me back to a time when I was playing Oblivion. For people that don't know, that's a game after Morrowind. And dreaming about the world full of possibilities on the screen in front of me. His game captures that spirit of fun that games had when we were young, and leads me to be a lot more skeptical about the game industry as a whole. If one person can create this kind of feeling and experience on their own, why are larger game companies struggling so hard to release even passable games in the modern age? The divide between game design for money and game design for player fun has been set between AAA studios and indie developers for the most part. And I'm very excited to see what the Bloodline turns into as its development continues, and what other experiences come out within the next few years.